"Stop, it won't fit!" The rancher forced the 13th knot and claimed his bride. Wild West. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the dusty plains of Laredo. It was a land where the wind whispered secrets and the horizon stretched endlessly, as if the earth itself were waiting for something great to happen. Tyrell, a rancher with broad shoulders and a heart as sturdy as the horses he rode, spurred his horse onward. His mind was heavy, his chest tight with a feeling he couldn't shake. The rancher had been through many battles in his life, but this one felt different. This was a fight for Serena, the woman he loved with all his soul. Serena, daughter of the wealthy landowner, Hadley Price, was promised to Gerald Hawk, a man with money, power, and no regard for the heart of a woman. Tyrell, on the other hand, had nothing but his land and his pride. But what he lacked in wealth, he made up for in spirit and determination. Tyrell's father had always spoken of the 13th knot, a challenge tied to the very heart of Laredo tradition. It was said that only a man truly worthy could tie the knot and claim his bride. The 13th knot had become a symbol of love, of loyalty, and of the courage to fight for what was right. For generations, ranchers and farmers had faced it, and few had ever succeeded. Tyrell had heard the stories, heard the whispers of the old men in town who swore that no one would ever conquer the knot. But today, he had no choice but to try. Serena's future was on the line, and so was his. As Tyrell rode into town, the sound of hooves echoed off the dry earth, and a small crowd gathered around the hitching post. They were waiting for something. They were waiting for him. In the center of the small crowd, standing proudly in front of the wooden hitching post, was the rope that would decide everything. It was thick, its fibers twisted in an ancient pattern, the knot itself carefully formed in the middle of it. Tyrell knew what he had to do. He had to tie the 13th knot. If he succeeded, he would prove to the people of Laredo that he was worthy of Serena. If he failed, he would lose her forever. The onlookers murmured, some shaking their heads, others watching closely with hope. Tyrell dismounted from his horse, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. The air was still, the silence almost unbearable. He stood before the knot, his hands resting on the rope, feeling its rough texture under his fingers. "Are you sure you can do it, Tyrell?" a voice called out from the crowd. It was Marcus, an old rancher who had once been friends with Tyrell's father. He was a man who had seen it all, and his eyes were full of doubt. The knot's never been tied. Not by anyone, not by any man. It's just a story, a myth. Tyrell glanced up, his eyes locking with Marcus's. There was no anger in his gaze, just a quiet determination. "It's not a myth," Tyrell said, his voice steady. "It's a test, and I'm not afraid of it." The crowd fell silent, as if holding its breath. Serena, who had been watching from the porch of her father's house, now stood in the doorway. Her face was pale, her hands clutching the edge of the doorframe. She had known this moment was coming, had known Tyrell would try, but seeing him standing before the knot made her heart race. She could hardly believe this was happening. Her heart was torn between two worlds. One was the life she had been promised, a life of luxury with Gerald Hawk, a man who could give her everything but the one thing she truly wanted, love. And then there was Tyrell, the rancher she had loved for years. He had nothing but his land and his heart, but to Serena, that was everything. He was everything. She wanted to shout out to him, to tell him to stop, to spare himself from the pain of failing, but she knew that the 13th knot wasn't just about the knot. It was about proving to the world, to her family, that Tyrell was worthy of her, that his love, his heart, was stronger than anything Gerald Hawk could offer. Tyrell knelt down beside the rope, his hands finding the loop of the knot. He could feel the weight of every eye upon him, every whisper of doubt floating in the air. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "The knot is the test of the soul, son. Only the one who loves with all their heart will succeed." He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying his breath. There was no room for hesitation. Tyrell had learned many things in his life: how to break a wild stallion, how to fight off rustlers, how to survive in a harsh world, but the lesson he had learned most was to never give up, and this time he wouldn't. Not for his father, not for the people of Laredo, and certainly not for himself. With a steady hand he began to work the knot, his fingers moving deftly, twisting the rope around itself. Every move had to be precise, every turn deliberate. The knot resisted, as it always did, tightening, pulling back, but Tyrell did not let up. The sweat on his brow was only matched by the strength in his grip. He couldn't stop now. Behind him he heard a voice soft but clear. You can do it, Tyrell. It was Serena, her voice filled with quiet hope. That was all he needed to hear. The crowd, which had been silent until now, began to murmur. They could see it. Tyrell was getting closer. The knot, which had once seemed like an impossible task, was slowly starting to give way under the strength of his will. The rope began to loosen in his hands, the threads falling into place. With one final pull, the knot clicked into place. Tyrell exhaled deeply, his heart pounding in his chest. The 13th knot had been tied. The crowd erupted into applause, but Tyrell didn't hear it. All he could see was Serena, standing there in the doorway, her eyes wide with surprise and admiration. He stood up, the knot secure in his hands, and walked toward her, every step filled with purpose. As he reached her, he held out the rope, the 13th knot, now a symbol of his love. Serena took it, her fingers brushing against his as she accepted his offering. Tyrell, she whispered, her voice trembling. You've done it. You've tied the knot. He smiled, a simple, knowing smile. It was never about the knot, Serena, he said, his voice full of warmth. It was always about us. And in that moment, Serena knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Because Tyrell had not only tied the knot, he had tied their fates together forever. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dusty plains of Laredo. Tyrell stood by the hitching post, the 13th knot still in his hands. The crowd had slowly begun to disperse, but he didn't notice. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the fiery glow of the setting sun met the darkening sky. His heart pounded in his chest, a steady reminder of the weight of what he had just accomplished. He had tied the knot. He had passed the test. But now, the hardest part lay ahead. Serena had been watching him from the porch of her father's house, her face filled with a mixture of pride and worry. Tyrell had known she loved him, but he also knew the pressure she was under. Her father, Hadley Price, was a powerful man, and he had promised her hand to Gerald Hawke, a man who would stop at nothing to make sure he got what he wanted. Tyrell could feel the tension in the air. It was not just the knot that had to be tied. It was the future of his love for Serena that was on the line. He knew the battle had only just begun. "Good work, Tyrell," came a voice behind him. It was Marcus, the old rancher who had watched him struggle with the knot earlier. He had been one of the few who had believed Tyrell could succeed. The others had laughed, saying it was impossible, that the knot would never be tied. But Marcus had never doubted him. "You've done it, boy. You've proven something today." Tyrell turned to face Marcus, a tired but grateful smile on his face. "It wasn't just me, Marcus. It was always about more than just the knot." Marcus gave a slow nod, understanding what Tyrell meant. "Love is a powerful thing," he said. "It can drive a man to do things he never thought possible." Tyrell's gaze shifted to the porch where Serena still stood. She was watching him closely, her face a picture of uncertainty. Tyrell knew the battle wasn't over yet. Even though he had tied the knot, he still had to win Serena's heart, and that would not be easy. "I've got to talk to her," Tyrell said, his voice low but firm. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Her father's not one to let go of what he wants." Tyrell's expression hardened. "I'm sure. I've got to try." "I can't just let her go." Without another word, Tyrell walked toward the porch. His boots thudded heavily against the wooden steps, the sound echoing in the still evening air. Serena turned to face him as he approached, her eyes filled with both hope and fear. "Tyrell," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You did it. You tied the knot." Tyrell stopped just a few feet from her, holding the 13th knot in his hand. He didn't speak immediately, his eyes locked with hers. It was as if the world had fallen away, leaving only the two of them standing there, caught in a moment that felt both timeless and fragile. "I did it for you, Serena," he said finally, his voice soft but filled with determination. "For us." Serena's lips trembled as she looked down at the knot in his hand. "But my father, he's promised me to Gerald." Tyrell stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. "I know, but you don't belong to him, Serena. You belong with me. I know I don't have much to offer, but I swear to you I'll give you everything I have." Tears welled in Serena's eyes, and for a moment she couldn't speak. She had been torn for so long, caught between the life her father had chosen for her and the love she felt for Tyrell. The knot, the test, it had all been a way for her to prove to herself what she already knew. But now, standing before Tyrell, the reality of what was at stake hit her harder than ever before. "I don't know what to do, Tyrell," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, but my father, he'll never let me go." Tyrell took her hand gently, his thumb brushing over her fingers. "We'll find a way, Serena. I promise. This knot, this test, it's just the beginning. We can't let fear or tradition decide our future. Only we can do that." Serena stared at him for a long moment, her heart torn between duty and desire. She had always known that Tyrell was the one who truly understood her, the one who saw her for who she was, not for the wealth or power her father had. But could she truly defy her father's wishes? Could she walk away from everything she had ever known? "Serena," Tyrell said softly, squeezing her hand, "you don't have to choose between us." "I won't let you. Not when I know what we can have together." Her heart ached as she looked up at him, the weight of her decision bearing down on her shoulders. She had always believed in love, but now, standing here with Tyrell, she realized just how much it would cost her. "Come with me," Tyrell said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "I don't care what your father says. You're my future, and I'm not letting you go without a fight." Serena closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The decision was harder than she could ever have imagined, but in her heart she knew what she wanted. She had spent too long living a life that wasn't truly hers. Now it was time to live for herself, to follow her heart wherever it might lead. She opened her eyes and looked up at Tyrell. "I'm with you," she said, her voice firm and clear. Tyrell smiled, relief flooding through him. He reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. For a moment they just stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, letting the world fade away. But the world didn't fade. It was still there, waiting for them to take the next step. As Tyrell held Serena, he knew their love would not be easy. They would face many obstacles, her father, Gerald, and the powerful forces that tried to tear them apart. But Tyrell was no stranger to hardship. He had fought for everything he had in life, and he would fight for Serena. "I'll always fight for you, Serena," he whispered in her ear, "no matter what." Serena looked up at him, a spark of hope in her eyes. "And I'll fight for us." Together they stood there, ready to face whatever came next. The knot had been tied. The battle was far from over, but Tyrell and Serena knew that as long as they had each other, nothing could truly stand in their way. The full moon cast a pale light over the plains, its glow illuminating the silent night as Tyrell and Serena walked hand in hand towards the edge of the ranch. Their steps were slow but determined, the weight of their decision heavy in the cool evening air. Serena glanced back toward her father's house, where the lights still burned in the windows, signaling that her father, Hadley Price, was still awake. She knew he would not take kindly to her decision. He had spent years building his empire, and the idea of losing control over his daughter was a blow he wouldn't take lightly. "You sure about this, Serena?" Tyrell asked, his voice low as they walked side by side. His thumb brushed over her hand, a small but constant reassurance. Serena took a deep breath and looked up at the stars scattered across the vast open sky. "I'm sure, Tyrell. It's not going to be easy, but I can't live a lie anymore. Gerald Hawke, he's not the one I want. It's you. Always has been." Her words were like a balm to Tyrell's soul, though the reality of what they were about to face still loomed over them. Hadley Price would not let his daughter go without a fight. He had arranged this marriage, planned for this day, and Serena's decision would surely be seen as a betrayal. But in her eyes, Tyrell saw nothing but sincerity. She was ready to choose him over everything else. "I'll always protect you, Serena," Tyrell promised, his jaw tightening. "No matter what comes, I won't let him or anyone else tear us apart." Serena squeezed his hand, her grip strong. "I know, Tyrell, but we need to be ready. My father, he won't let this go easily." They reached the edge of the ranch, standing at the fence that separated Tyrell's land from the open plains. In the distance, the glow of the town was faint but visible, a reminder of the life they were leaving behind. Tyrell knew what he had to do next. He had already faced the first challenge, tying the 13th knot. Now, the real test would begin. "We need to get to town," Tyrell said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We'll talk to the sheriff, make sure he knows what's going on. I don't think your father's going to let us just leave without a fight. We need to be prepared for anything." Serena nodded, but her heart was heavy. She knew that Tyrell's plan was sound, but there were so many things they hadn't thought of yet. Would the sheriff help them? Would the people of Laredo stand with them? Or would they side with her father, who was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in town? "Let's go," she said finally, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her heart. "I'm with you, Tyrell. We'll face it together." Tyrell smiled at her, his eyes full of admiration. "I knew you would be." Together they left the ranch, the night air cool against their skin as they made their way toward the town. The journey was quiet, the sounds of the night taking over as they walked side by side, their hearts in sync. But as they neared the town, the tension began to build. Tyrell could feel it, an unease that settled deep in his chest. The closer they got to Laredo, the more he could sense the weight of the conflict ahead. It wasn't just Serena's father they had to worry about. It was the entire town. Hadley Price had built his name here, and many of the town's people owed him their livelihoods. Would they stand against him for the sake of love, or would they choose to side with power? Serena was quiet beside him, lost in her own thoughts. She had grown up in Laredo, and she knew how tightly the townspeople held on to tradition and loyalty. Her father's name meant everything to them, but Serena had made her choice, and she wasn't going to let fear change that. As they reached the outskirts of town, the first sign of trouble appeared. A group of men, ranchers and workers who knew Serena's father, stood in front of the local saloon, leaning against the wooden walls. When they saw Tyrell and Serena approaching, their eyes narrowed and they stepped forward, blocking the path. "Where do you think you're going, Serena?" one of the men called out. It was Gus, a burly rancher who worked for Hadley Price. He was known for his loyalty to Serena's father and for his quick temper. Tyrell stepped forward, placing himself between Serena and Gus. His body tensed, ready for whatever was coming next. "We're going to see the sheriff," Tyrell said, his voice firm. "We have business with him." Gus sneered, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "You've got no business here, Tyrell. Serena's father ain't going to take kindly to this. You'd best turn around and go back where you came from before things get ugly." Tyrell's hand instinctively moved to the knife at his belt, but he kept his movements calm and steady. "I'm not going anywhere. Not without Serena. She's not going back to your boss. Not now, not ever." The tension in the air was thick, the men watching them carefully. Tyrell could see the fear in some of their eyes, but there was also hesitation. Serena's father's grip on the town was strong, but the loyalty some of these men had for Serena, and for Tyrell, as a fellow rancher, was even stronger. Gus stepped closer, his expression darkening. "You don't know what you're asking for, Tyrell," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Hadley Price doesn't lose. Not like this. And neither does his daughter. You've got one chance to turn around and leave before things get real messy." Serena's heart pounded in her chest. She had never seen these men so angry. But she couldn't let Tyrell back down. She couldn't let him face this alone. "We're not leaving," Serena said, her voice strong as she stepped forward, standing beside Tyrell. "I've made my choice. I'm with him." Gus paused, his eyes flicking between Tyrell and Serena. The men around him muttered, unsure of what to do. They had never seen Serena like this, strong, defiant, ready to fight for what she wanted. After a long moment, Gus sighed, his hand falling away from his revolver. "You've got guts, girl. I'll give you that. But it's going to be a hell of a lot harder than you think." Tyrell stood tall, his shoulders squared. "We're ready for whatever comes next." With a final glance, Gus turned and motioned for the others to follow him. The group of men stepped aside, allowing Tyrell and Serena to pass. The path was clear, for now. But Tyrell knew this was just the beginning. "We're not out of the woods yet," he said to Serena, his voice quiet but full of resolve. Serena nodded, her face set with determination. "I know. But we'll face it together, Tyrell." They continued toward the sheriff's office, the weight of what lay ahead settling on their shoulders. But no matter what happened, they knew one thing. They would fight for each other no matter the cost. The sheriff's office stood at the corner of the street, a modest building with a worn wooden door and windows that had seen better days. Tyrell and Serena approached it quietly, the weight of their decision still heavy in their hearts. The streets of Laredo were mostly empty at this hour. The town hushed as if it too held its breath, waiting for something to happen. Inside, the sheriff, a tall man named Elias Grant, sat at his desk, looking over some papers. His office was sparse, with only a few chairs and a single dim lamp illuminating the room. The sheriff's face was stern, his eyes sharp as he looked up at the sound of the door opening. "Serena, what brings you two here at this hour?" Tyrell stepped forward, his expression serious. "We need your help, Sheriff," he said. "Serena's father, he won't let her go. We need protection. He'll come for us, and we can't just run." Sheriff Grant leaned back in his chair, his gaze flicking between the two of them. He had known Tyrell for years, but he had also known Hadley Price for much longer. The rancher was a man of power, and his influence stretched across the town like an unspoken rule. The sheriff knew this wouldn't be an easy decision. "Hadley's a powerful man," Grant said, his voice low. And he doesn't take kindly to anyone standing against him. If I help you, it won't just be you two I'm risking. It's everyone in this town. Tyrell nodded. He had known this would be difficult, but he wasn't about to back down now. I know, Sheriff. But we don't have a choice. I love Serena, and I'm not going to let her go back to a life she doesn't want. I'm asking you to stand with us. Serena stood beside him, her hand gently resting on his arm. Please, Sheriff, we know it won't be easy. But we have to try. I can't go back to Gerald. I can't be with him when my heart belongs to Tyrell. For a long moment there was silence. The sheriff's gaze softened as he looked at Serena, then at Tyrell. He had seen their struggle, their determination, and he could feel the sincerity in their words. But there was still fear in his heart, a fear of what could happen if he went against Hadley Price. I've known Hadley a long time, Grant said slowly. He's a hard man. He won't let this go. But you've got guts, both of you, and I can't just stand by and let a man like him tear apart what you've got. Serena's heart skipped a beat as she looked at the sheriff, her eyes full of hope. You'll help us? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant stood up from his desk, his boots clicking softly on the wooden floor. But we need to move fast. We'll need to get you out of here, Serena. I've got a friend who runs a safe house a few miles out of town. It's isolated, and it's the best place to hide for now. Tyrell and Serena exchanged a quick look, their hearts both heavy and relieved. They knew it wasn't over yet, but this was the first step toward freedom. We're ready, Tyrell said, his voice firm. We'll do whatever it takes. Grant nodded and walked to the back of his office, pulling a dusty coat off a hanger and throwing it over his shoulder. Then let's go. We can't waste any more time. As they left the sheriff's office, Tyrell kept a close eye on the streets, making sure no one was watching them. They couldn't afford to be seen leaving town. If Hadley's men caught wind of their plan, they'd be trapped. The sheriff led the way, his horse already waiting outside. The group of three moved quickly through the darkened streets, their steps soft but purposeful. Tyrell's mind raced, thinking of the risks ahead, but there was no turning back. He had promised Serena that he would fight for her, and now that promise was more real than ever. As they reached the outskirts of Laredo, the town's lights began to fade behind them, swallowed up by the darkness. Ahead, the sheriff's friend's safe house loomed in the distance, an old ranch house surrounded by thick trees and open fields. It was isolated, quiet, and the perfect place to hide for a while. When they arrived, the door opened before they even knocked. A tall man with a weathered face and a rifle slung over his shoulder stood in the doorway. His eyes were wary, but when he saw the sheriff, his posture relaxed. "Elias, what's going on?" the man asked, his voice low. "Trouble," the sheriff replied. "These two need to stay here for a while. Hadley Price is gunning for them." The man nodded, stepping aside to let them in. "You're welcome here. No one gets past me." Inside, the house was simple, but it had everything they needed: shelter, warmth, and safety. Tyrell and Serena sat down at the wooden table, their bodies finally able to relax for the first time in hours. But the relief didn't last long. "We'll need to be ready," the sheriff said, his voice grave. "Hadley will come looking for you. He won't stop until he gets Serena back, but we'll make sure he doesn't find you here." Tyrell nodded, his jaw tight. "Thank you, Sheriff. We'll be ready." For the first time in what felt like forever, Serena allowed herself to breathe, even if just for a moment. She glanced at Tyrell, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "We're safe, for now," she said softly. "But what if he comes after us? What if he won't stop?" Tyrell reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "He'll stop when he realizes we won't give up. We're not backing down. I'll keep you safe, Serena." "Always." Serena squeezed his hand, her heart filled with hope and fear in equal measure. She had made her choice, and now there was no turning back. Together, they would face whatever came next. And no matter what happened, they would do it together.